Focus is not just a concept we casually throw around. It's a biological function rooted in the way your brain is structured and wired. It involves precise coordination between your prefrontal cortex, which governs deliberate thinking and decision-making, and subcortical systems like the thalamus and brainstem, which determine arousal and attention filtering. When you decide to focus on something, whether it's a task, a goal, or your own personal growth, you are engaging in a process that reshapes your brain structure in real time. This is the essence of neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to change in response to experience. And attention is the gateway to that change. In practical terms, that means what you repeatedly focus on, you become. If you consistently attend to distractions, social media notifications, shallow dopamine hits, you are literally training your brain to be more distractible. The synaptic connections that support short-term gratification and rapid tasks, switching, get stronger. On the other hand, when you direct your attention inward, when you focus on your own development, your breathing, your emotional regulation, your vision, you are reinforcing the pathways associated with long-term thinking, emotional resilience, and executive control. This isn't motivational fluff. This is what your nervous system is doing in the background every time you choose what to engage with. The challenge is that focus is a finite resource. Your brain is not designed to maintain high levels of attention all day long. In fact, the neurotransmitter systems that underlie focus, particularly norepinephrine and acetylcholine, have a limited capacity before they require rest or rebalancing. That's why real focus comes not just from intention, but from structure. You need to build your day around blocks of undistracted, deliberate attention, what neuroscientists call deep work. In these blocks, you protect your brain from competing stimuli. You turn off notifications, close unnecessary tabs, and reduce sensory inputs that divert your limited attentional resources. Every time you successfully engage in focused work without distraction, you strengthen what's known as top-down control. That is, your prefrontal cortex becomes better at overriding impulsive reactions that come from deeper, more primitive brain structures. This is why people who consistently train focus appear calmer, more confident, and more grounded. They are not simply more motivated. They've trained their brain to maintain control over internal and external distractions. A crucial part of this training is understanding the role of neurochemistry. When you focus intently on a single task, your brain releases acetylcholine at specific synapses. This chemical acts like a spotlight, enhancing the signal-to-noise ratio in your neural networks. At the same time, dopamine provides a sense of motivation and reward. If you link focus with incremental rewards, like completing a small task, checking off a goal, you start reinforcing the dopaminergic system in a way that sustains your ability to concentrate longer over time. But none of this happens automatically. Focus is a skill, and like any skill, it requires repetition under strain. The real gains happen when you resist the easy path, the short dopamine loops, the mindless scrolling, the multitasking myth. It's in those moments of resistance that you build the neural circuitry for real depth. You start to condition your brain not to crave novelty, but to value mastery. This is what separates high performers from the average. It's not just IQ or background. It's the repeated training of attentional control systems that most people neglect. And here's something people often overlook. Focusing on yourself isn't selfish, it's strategic. When you focus on yourself, you're not tuning out the world. You're tuning into the very instrument that lets you contribute meaningfully to the world. If your system is dysregulated, scattered, and reactive, you cannot serve others or achieve anything with consistency. By investing in your own capacity to focus, you're actually increasing your ability to have an impact, because your actions will come from clarity, not chaos. The practice of internal focus also allows you to monitor your own mind. This is where real transformation begins. You start to notice the moments your attention drifts. You start to catch the unconscious patterns, rumination, worry, comparison, that sap your energy and creativity. And as you catch them, you weaken them. The brain changes through what's called long-term depression of unused pathways and long-term potentiation of frequently used ones. In simpler terms, neurons that fire together wire together. So the more you focus on useful, empowering thoughts and actions, the more those become your default. This applies across every domain, whether you're pursuing fitness, business, learning, or relationships. In all cases, focus determines outcome, not just because it improves productivity, but because it aligns your nervous system with a specific direction. The more frequently and clearly you return your attention to what truly matters, the more your entire biology begins to support that goal. Your behavior shifts, your habits align, your inner dialogue becomes more coherent. That is not just psychological change, that is biological adaptation. And this is why focus must be trained daily, not once a week. Not when you're in the mood, daily. Even 5 to 10 minutes of directed internal attention can begin to shift the wiring of your brain. You can use tools like breathwork to calm the autonomic nervous system, visualization to set cognitive direction, and structured time blocks to reduce external load. These aren't hacks. They're interventions, backed by biology, that help you reclaim ownership of your attention in a world designed to steal it. The ability to focus on yourself, deliberately, consistently, and without apology, is one of the greatest assets you can develop. Because when you control your focus, you control your mind, and when you control your mind, you shape your reality from the inside out. Silence is often misunderstood. Most people think silence means simply not speaking. But from a neurobiological perspective, silence is a state, an internal configuration of your nervous system that allows for introspection, regulation, and recalibration. It is in silence that your brain and body access the deeper layers of cognitive and emotional processing. Silence is not just the absence of external sound. It is the deliberate withdrawal of your nervous system from a hyperreactive state into one of self-regulated awareness. And in that shift, something remarkable happens. Your physiology begins to synchronize with a slower, more coherent rhythm that supports clarity, presence, and decision-making. When you choose silence, you reduce the constant triggering of your sympathetic nervous system, the part of your autonomic system responsible for fight, flight, or freeze responses. Our modern environment is saturated with stimuli that keep us in this sympathetic mode: notifications, background noise, conversations that demand emotional responses, even the pressure to speak or respond. Over time, this state of constant arousal builds a feedback loop of anxiety, impulsivity, and fatigue. But when you remove yourself from that cycle, even briefly, your system begins to shift. Your parasympathetic nervous system engages. Heart rate slows, breath deepens, blood pressure drops. This is not relaxation in the shallow sense, it's regulation. It's the platform upon which higher-order thinking and long-term vision can be built. Staying silent is not suppression, it's strategy. You are not avoiding conflict, nor are you holding back your voice out of fear. You are choosing to observe instead of react, and that single shift alters the entire architecture of your decision-making process. In silence, you begin to notice what's actually happening inside your body and mind. You sense when your heart rate rises in response to stress. You catch the mental spiral that begins with a single intrusive thought. You witness how often your energy gets hijacked by external validation loops, and that awareness creates space between stimulus and response. In that space, you are no longer a slave to your emotions or impulses. You are now in control. There's a part of the brain called the anterior cingulate cortex. It plays a key role in error detection, conflict monitoring, and emotional regulation. Research shows that silence enhances activity in this region. So when you choose silence, you are literally increasing your capacity to detect when something is off, either in your external environment or within yourself. You become more sensitive to subtle cues. You refine your perception, and that heightened awareness becomes your edge. You make better decisions not because you're smarter, but because you're clearer. You speak less often, but when you do, your words carry more weight, because they come from a place of calm, not chaos. This is particularly important in social environments. The pressure to respond, to defend, to explain yourself. These are all nervous system reactions designed to seek safety through connection or control. But when you train yourself to remain silent, especially when triggered, you interrupt the default programming. You tell your system, we are safe even when we're not expressing. We are in control even when we're not reacting. That is an immensely powerful reconditioning of the brain. Over time, you develop what psychologists call a widened window of tolerance. You can handle more stress, more ambiguity, more complexity, without flipping into reactivity. And here's something else. Silence strengthens your inner voice. When you are constantly speaking, listening, posting, performing, you are tuning your nervous system to external frequencies. Your internal signal becomes faint. You forget how to hear yourself, but in silence, the internal voice gets louder. You begin to access deeper intuition because you're no longer filtering every thought through the lens of social approval. You begin to sense what is right for you, not what is popular, expected, or praised. This connection to your own inner compass is vital. Without it, you're just reacting to the world. With it, you can create your own world. Neurologically, silence promotes synchronization across brain networks. The default mode network, which governs self-reflection and introspection, comes online in silence. This is the same network involved in envisioning the future, empathizing with others, and integrating experiences into identity. When this network has space to operate, you begin to form a coherent sense of self. You understand your patterns. You see where your behaviors come from. You connect dots that you missed while rushing through life, speaking over your own thoughts. This is how insight is born, not from noise, but from stillness. Silence also protects your energy. Every conversation, every explanation, every defense. These are all expenditures of cognitive and emotional resources. If you're not deliberate, you burn your fuel talking about things that don't matter, trying to prove points to people who aren't listening or reacting to opinions that don't align with your values. But when you stay silent, you conserve energy. You build internal reserves. You don't need to share every plan, every struggle, every move. You allow your results to speak, and the energy you save can now be invested in things that actually move you forward: learning, building, creating, refining. From a hormonal standpoint, silence lowers baseline cortisol levels. It reduces inflammation markers and improves vagal tone, a measure of how well your nervous system can transition between arousal and rest. This matters because your ability to recover quickly from stress determines your long-term resilience. If you're always reactive, you burn out. If you can stay grounded, if you can maintain internal stillness even in chaos, you become nearly unshakable. That's not just emotional strength. That's physiological resilience. So silence isn't weakness. It's signal control. It's recognizing that not everything requires a response, and not every moment needs to be filled. It's the discipline to hold tension without needing to discharge it through words. And it's the wisdom to know that most breakthroughs happen when the noise stops, when the nervous system quiets, and the deeper layers of intelligence can finally be heard. The drive for external validation is deeply wired into the human brain. From an evolutionary standpoint, our survival once depended on being accepted by the tribe. Social rejection could mean isolation, and isolation could mean death. So it makes sense that your brain is finely tuned to cues of approval, disapproval, recognition, and status. The dopaminergic system, which governs motivation and reward, lights up when others acknowledge your efforts. This is why a compliment can feel exhilarating and a critique can feel like a threat. But if left unchecked, that wiring can trap you in a loop where your sense of self-worth is always contingent on someone else's opinion. You lose autonomy, you become reactive. You begin to shape your identity not around what you value internally, but around what gets applause externally. What happens when you shift that dynamic, when you focus on yourself and stay silent, is that you begin to reroute the circuits of reward. Instead of waiting for feedback to feel accomplished, you start generating internal signals of satisfaction through your own efforts, consistency, and progress. That's a neurochemical shift. Dopamine becomes less about the like, the comment, the praise, and more about the act itself. You no longer need an audience to feel aligned. This is a critical pivot because once your reward system becomes self-generated, you're no longer vulnerable to manipulation by external forces. You don't need to post about your journey. You don't need approval for your decisions. You don't need validation to move forward. You are neurologically independent. This doesn't mean you reject connection or community. Humans are still social beings. But there's a difference between connection and dependency. When your nervous system is trained to need reassurance, you give up your power. You become addicted to the ping of recognition. The moment someone disapproves or questions you, your system destabilizes. That instability isn't just emotional, it's physiological. Cortisol rises, your breathing gets shallow, your decision-making becomes compromised. You default to pleasing others, performing for approval, or withdrawing out of shame. And that cycle reinforces itself every time you give your power away to an opinion. But when you bring the focus back inward, when you track your progress privately, when you improve without the need to announce it, when you stay silent and build, the brain learns a new pattern. It learns to stabilize in solitude. It learns that safety isn't dependent on agreement, and over time, your baseline stress decreases. Your sense of self becomes anchored, not floating. You're not constantly evaluating your worth through comparison. You're assessing yourself based on your values, your growth, your consistency. That's a completely different loop, and it's one that rewires your brain for resilience instead of reactivity. From a neuroscience perspective, this shift from external to internal validation changes the way your prefrontal cortex interacts with limbic structures like the amygdala. The prefrontal cortex is responsible for executive functions, planning, regulating emotion, long-term thinking. The amygdala is involved in emotional salience, especially fear and threat detection. When you depend on others for validation, you activate the amygdala frequently. Every time someone criticizes or ignores you, the amygdala fires, signaling danger. Your prefrontal cortex has to work overtime to calm you down, to rationalize, to regain control. But when you reduce your exposure to external judgment by staying silent and focusing inward, you decrease the frequency of those amygdala activations. Your system gets quieter, more efficient, less reactive. You build true emotional control, and there's something else that happens when you stop chasing validation. Your actions become more authentic. When you're no longer performing for approval, your decisions start aligning with your real goals and values. You take actions not because they'll be seen, but because they matter. This creates a powerful form of momentum. You're no longer pulled in 100 directions by other people's expectations. You're moving in one direction, your own, and that coherence amplifies your results. You stop second-guessing. You stop asking for permission. You act. Silence supports this process by giving you space to listen to yourself. Most people speak so often, share so often, that they never actually check in with what they believe or feel. But in silence, your own voice becomes clearer. You can hear the difference between your intuition and your insecurity, between your real desires and the ones you've borrowed from others. That clarity becomes your compass, and when you start acting from that place, not for applause, but from alignment, your nervous system begins to trust you. You become your own source of safety. There's an enormous strength in this kind of internal sovereignty. You can sit in a room full of noise and stay centered. You can receive criticism without crumbling. You can be overlooked and not lose faith in your direction. That's not detachment, that's control. It's the result of rewiring your reward systems, reconditioning your nervous system, and reinforcing your identity through private, consistent action rather than public display. It's a kind of mental immunity. You're no longer influenced by every trend, opinion, or response. You've built a stable internal architecture, and that's what allows you to navigate life with clarity and strength. This is a process. It takes time to reroute reward pathways that have been trained for years to seek external feedback. It takes effort to stay silent when your reflex is to explain or share or justify. But every time you choose internal focus over external attention, you strengthen the neural circuits of independence, discipline, and clarity. You teach your system that it is enough to move quietly, to build without broadcasting, to grow without applause, and in doing so, you become resilient, not because the world changed, but because your response to it did. Change doesn't happen in a single moment of inspiration. It's the outcome of repeated action under consistent conditions. The nervous system is not designed for sudden transformation. It's designed to adapt through repetition, pattern recognition, and long-term reinforcement. When you commit to focusing on yourself and staying silent, you're creating a controlled environment where your brain and body can shift slowly but powerfully over time. It's this daily consistency, not intensity, that leads to real, durable change. The kind of change that reshapes your baseline physiology, not just your mindset. Neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire itself, depends on repetition. It's not enough to feel motivated once or twice. You need sustained input day after day in order for the brain to decide this is worth building. Every time you choose to spend 10, 20, 30 minutes in focused, silent work on your goals, your breath, your training, your craft, you are casting a neurological vote. That vote strengthens the synaptic pathways that support attention, discipline, and emotional regulation. Over weeks and months, those pathways become dominant. They override the older, reactive circuits built on distraction and impulsivity. But that only happens if you keep showing up with intention. This is why routines are so critical. The brain thrives on predictability. When you build a structure around your focus and silence, you reduce the cognitive load required to maintain discipline. You're no longer asking yourself every morning, should I do this? You've built it into your system, and your nervous system learns that this time, this space, this state of mind is a signal to enter a deeper mode of functioning. You access what's called a flow-prone state, where prefrontal activity becomes more efficient, distraction decreases, and dopamine supports sustained engagement without the need for external stimulation. Most people never get to this state because they interrupt their own growth with inconsistency. They change directions too often, speak before their thoughts are fully formed, and abandon habits the moment they feel inconvenient. But if you train yourself to stay the course, to stay silent, stay consistent, and stay focused, you begin to experience something most people never access: internal momentum. Internal momentum is different from motivation. It doesn't rely on emotion. It's a physiological alignment where your thoughts, behaviors, and nervous system all point in the same direction. That kind of alignment creates progress that compounds over time. It's in this space, this long stretch of consistent, focused silence, that your nervous system recalibrates. Your brain starts to operate on slower, more efficient wave patterns. Your autonomic nervous system becomes more balanced, with increased vagal tone and reduced chronic cortisol levels. You start sleeping better, your digestion improves, your ability to regulate emotion during conflict gets stronger. This isn't just personal development, it's biological optimization, and it's earned, not through noise, but through structured stillness. One of the major benefits of long, long-term consistency is that it transforms your sense of identity. Identity isn't a fixed trait. It's a reflection of the actions you repeat. When you focus on yourself every day, when you stay silent instead of reacting, when you consistently make small, precise decisions that align with your vision, you begin to see yourself differently. Your brain notices this pattern and starts to recalibrate your self-image. You go from being someone who's trying to change to someone who has changed. This shift isn't theoretical, it's embedded in neural architecture. Your brain stops doubting because it now has evidence of who you are becoming. Over time, you also develop what neuroscientists call interoceptive awareness, the ability to sense internal signals from your body. You become more attuned to your emotional state, your stress levels, your energy rhythms. You learn to notice subtle shifts that others ignore, and with that awareness, you can intervene earlier. You can adjust your behavior before burnout hits. You can recognize when you're drifting into distraction or people pleasing. You're no longer blindly reacting. You're monitoring and directing your internal state in real time. This is the depth that silence offers. When you remove external noise, you give your system the space it needs to process and integrate. And in that space, new insights emerge. Patterns become clear. Old emotional wounds surface and begin to resolve. Not because you forced it, but because the system finally had room to breathe. Consistency in this kind of silence becomes therapeutic. It allows your nervous system to clean itself up, to return to baseline, to move forward without the clutter of unprocessed stress or noise. There's a compounding effect here that most people underestimate. The person who practices self-regulated focus for 30 minutes a day may not look different from the outside in the first week or month. But 6 months later, their internal state is entirely different from someone who hasn't done the work. Their nervous system is more resilient. Their prefrontal cortex is more efficient. Their decision-making is clearer. Their relationships are healthier not because they read more, but because they listen better, respond more intentionally, and carry less internal chaos into their interactions. That is the power of long-term consistency and silent focus. You're building a foundation that can carry increasing levels of complexity and challenge. You're not getting less emotional. You're becoming more emotionally skilled. You're not withdrawing from the world. You're preparing yourself to engage with it more effectively. And that preparation is not something you can fast-track. It requires quiet, focused, repetitive action. The kind that nobody sees, the kind that doesn't get applause, but the nervous system registers it, and over time, your entire system starts to trust you again. You've shown it through action that you can stay the course, regulate your state, and build from the inside out.